Okay, so let's get started with working on our conditional statement quiz program. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create a variable for our scores. We're going to call it user score, and we're going to set this variable to 0 to start off with. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable for our first question, and I'm going to prompt the user the question. I'm just going to create a couple simple questions here, nothing too crazy, just to show you guys the way this program would work. Your question can be whatever you like. After we create our variable and prompt our user for the question, we will create our if statement. We'll make sure that the user's answer has to equal the correct answer. And then, if the user gets the answer correct, remember that we need to let the user know. So, in my case, I'm just going to use the alert command. You could use the document.write command, whatever you prefer. But we'll create an alert command and tell the user that, hey, you got the answer correct, good job. If the user entered in the wrong answer, then we will use an else statement to tell the user that they got the answer wrong. So if the user gets the question right, then our alert command will run. We also need to add in our variable score, and what happens here is make sure you put this in the if part of the box, because what this is saying is if the user gets the answer right, then give them 1 point. Take the variable of user score and combine it with 1, and since it starts off with 0, it just turns to 1. Finally, we put our else statement in. And I'm just going to make a simple alert command here and write something like, sorry, you got the answer wrong, please try again. Once we have the basis of our first question, what we can actually do is we can actually copy this whole section here and paste it 3 times and just change the contents in our question to make 3 separate questions. This saves us a lot of time on coding and retyping everything out 3 times. So I'm going to create a little bit of space here. I'm going to add our 3 questions. Most of the content here can stay the same, but what we're going to need to do is we're going to create a new variable for each question. And we're of course going to have to actually change our question. So our quiz program is a little bit more challenging. Instead of asking the same question 3 times, that would be a little bit too easy. And finally, we're going to do it to our third question here. We're going to create a new variable, and again, make sure that the variable matches our if statement, and then change our question to be something completely different. We'll do an adding question, a multiplying question, and a simple division question. Alright, so if it looks pretty good up here, first we have our variable score starting out with 0. We have our first question. If the user gets it right, they score 1 point. We have our second question. Again, if the user gets it right, they score another point. And our third question. If the user gets it right, they score a 3rd point. Look at our score. We need to make sure that our score command is being updated in the if statement of every question. And then finally, what we're going to do at the end here is going to write a conditional statement that's going to look at the user's score. And if they scored 2 or 3, then the user has passed the quiz. If they scored less than 2, then they failed the quiz. So we're going to have to use our AND operator. Or actually, in this case, we use the OR operator. Because what we're saying here is if the user scored 2 or 3, we can use that. And if the user did score 2 or 3, then the result will be true, and then we can write something like, hey, you passed the test. Good job. And then for our else statement, we can write something like, if the user's score equals less than 2, then the user failed. And we will write something like, or we can just write a simple else statement. Since we only have 2 possible outcomes here, we can just write a true statement, and then we can just write an else statement. If we had more than 2 outcomes, then we would have to add the less than 2. But in this case, we can just add a simple else statement, since our program is pretty simple, and it should run fine. So this is going to look a little bit confusing. We have a lot of conditional statements here. But this is a great way to understand how conditional statements work in JavaScript. Let's add some comments to our code. I'm going to add a comment here that's going to let our developer, whether it be ourselves or somebody else, know that this section right here is taking the user's score and telling them if they passed or failed. I'm also going to add a comment up here that's going to let us know that this is what the user's score is, and we're setting it to 0. Lastly, I'm going to create some comments that are going to let us know where each question is in the code. So if we ever have to edit question 1, question 2, question 3, we can take a quick little look at our comments and know exactly where they are in our code. Alright, so our code is looking not too bad. It's organized half decently. And I think we're almost ready to give it a go to see if it works. Let's give it a save, and let's run the program. Oh, like usual, we have a syntax error. Let's look at our program and see if we can find out what it is. If you ever get in a situation where you can't figure out what the code error is in your program, you can always go to the developer console, remember, and you can look for the error. So we can see we have a syntax error. If we click here, we can actually see in our code where our error is. Pretty cool, right? So we can see here that we actually didn't write our question in a string. Forgot to put our quotations there. Pretty simple mistake, right? But with the JavaScript console, we can actually narrow it down. So if you look through your code and you're just having trouble, before you get frustrated, try to use the JavaScript console to find out what your error is. So we're going to have to go through our questions and change our text into strings. Then we can save our code, and let's see if it works. Alright, our program is working. So let's try to get all questions right and see what happens. Okay, so we got all 3 questions right, and we passed the quiz. Awesome. Now I'm going to purposely get a couple questions wrong here. So let's run the code again and see what happens when we get only 2 questions right. Oh, something's going on here. We're writing the wrong question, but we're still getting the answer right. So we have a mistake in our code. Let's take a look and see what's happening this time. Ah, I can see the problem here. We forgot to use our strict equal to operator here. Remember with the triple equals? We just put the 1 equals, so that's a syntax error. So now we're going to add that in, and I think our program is almost perfect. Let's give it a go and see if it works. Alright, we can see that when we do type in the wrong answer, we actually get a message saying we typed in the wrong answer. Oh, we got the wrong answer again. Let's try this one more time. Alright, so we can see that our program is working correctly. If a user fails, they get prompt to rerun the program and see if they can pass. Now, we are getting another error where what's happening is, because we use the triple equals operator, if the user types in 4 as a string, it's not actually correct because we're not converting our integer into a string. So we're going to have to change our equal to actually be a string. So we can see we did it with the other ones, but question 1 we forgot to do. So we'll type in 4 here. And there you go, we can see that it's now correct. This is the power of troubleshooting your program. As your programs get bigger and complex, you need to troubleshoot them and try to figure out the possible ways your programs to run. Because when you first start off, you're probably going to make a lot of syntax errors. It's a good idea to go back through your code and try to achieve each outcome in your code. This is called debugging and testing your program. We can see here that our program is operating 100%. It took a little bit of time, but we finally created a quiz program with multiple conditional statements. Good job. Let's take a quick quiz and we can continue on working with functions.